All right, we are live. Welcome to another episode of Roasting Marshmallows. My name is Rolf Zuurt and I'll be your host. So we have done some presentations on Agile in the past, and usually the takeaway is that it is easy for companies to adopt Agile practices by starting to use certain Agile frameworks or even copying the Agile practices of other successful companies. This is usually done not by invitation to the people, but rather by command. And it is not enough to make just the teams agile, though, because today's companies are expected to be flexible and both rapidly responsive and resilient to change, which basically asks them to be agile. Lack of an overarching theory about how to expand the Agile Manifesto has led to many fragmented attempts to apply Agile company-wide. A book that can help companies achieve true agility is Company-Wide Agility with Beyond Budgeting, Open Space, and Sociocracy. And today around the campfire, we have one of the authors of that book, Jutta Eckstein. She works as an independent coach, consultant, trainer, author, and speaker. She has helped many teams and organizations worldwide to make agile transitions. She's experienced in applying agile processes within medium-sized to large distributed mission-critical projects and has written about her experiences. She holds an MA Business Coaching and Change Management and a Product Engineering and Bachelor Education. If I get diplomas wrong, then you can correct me. She's a member of the Agile Alliance, having served on the board of directors from 2003 to 2007, and a member of the program committee of many different American, Asian, and European conferences, where she has also presented her work. Welcome, Jutta.
Thank you for inviting me.
And of course, we also have two other guests, regular guests on the show this morning. Panche, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Rolf.
How's it going?
Really good, really good.
Yeah?
It was a very ad hoc agreement to record this, but really excited about it, especially about the topics. And really glad to be part of this discussion.
All right. And another guest who also scrambled to make this work. I think he read the book in 2 days. Henk?
Yes.
Welcome.
Yes. Thanks, man. Yes,
how are you doing?
Looking forward for this. Indeed, I consumed the whole book in 2 days. It was just like I have a lot of questions, so I hope we can make a conversation, not an interrogatory session to her. So let's see.
Yeah. So
cool.
so Jutta, the book that we mentioned, the title was actually pretty long, so many subjects in that book are covered. But in the first place, what drove you guys to actually write the book?
Well, of course, we wanted to put all the buzzwords together, and that was our whole mission, and so we managed to do that. Yeah. And maybe a more serious question or answer to that is that what we saw is that people who looked for company-wide agility, that they were, I would say, stuck looking into Agile and trying to leverage, for example, Scrum all over the place. And we just saw that this isn't the answer. We have to think beyond Agile. And also we realized there's a lot of stuff out there. Well, on the one hand, it was natural, for example, to look at sociocracy, because this is the home in quotes for John, so my co-author. Yet, stuff like beyond budgeting, money rules the world. And if the budget is done in a specific way, then you cannot really be agile because it defines how stuff is really run. If you fix it in advance, then there isn't much agility really out there. So, I can go on and on. So the core thing I would think is we were looking at what are the values or the drivers for a company being agile? And then what stuff is out there that helps to achieve that from very different perspectives?
Right. And so you mentioned the sociocracy a bit, which, the other terms of the title of the book I've heard about, but the sociocracy one, not so much. I have a vague idea of what it means, but could you maybe explain the term a bit to me?
Yeah, sure. So from there are various definitions, but one definition that I find easy is, as we all know, democracy is for society, so is sociocracy for organizations. Right. So it's really comparable to that. So it's on a different scale, and it is ruled by the socios, and I'm not a Greek person, so that's Greek, which means ruled by people who are associated to each other, which is different for a society where the perspective is much larger. And ruled by means here especially that everything is aiming for equivalence.
Yeah.
And everything means mainly how we deal with power. Yeah. So how are we structured in terms of power? Is it centralized, decentralized? How are we making decisions with this, which is a key way of showing power or implementing power? And also here, so I'm happy to go into the details what Sociocracy's answer is to that, but it's really around these things. So ensuring equivalence in an organization by looking at how is power distributed and offering ways how to do that so equivalence can be reached.
Okay. So I think one question that, let's say, come to us all the time when we start like digging into more to this, apparently for us new concepts that they are not very new, like what you have in your book, right? Beyond budgeting, open space, was like, why can't we see this before? Like, why took it so long for us to actually stumble upon this? Like, do you have like, because I read that this beyond budgeting is more than 20 years. It's also like Agile. So why don't we all know that? Why do we still need to explain this to a lot of people from the companies like we go to consult and the CEOs, they have no idea or never even heard about the concept. Like, do you know why is that?
Well, I have my thoughts around that. So first of all, there are always people who are kind of ahead of what they are doing, and they are also looking at their specific area. Like Agile, they're the people looked at software development. They haven't thought of, well, maybe those concepts can be used for company-wide agility. That wasn't the idea back at the time. They were looking at software, and the same is true for like beyond budgeting was exactly looking at budgets first. But now they also say, well, actually beyond budgeting is the answer to business agility now that we are all talking about that stuff, right? So first of all, stuff is always happening. And then the other thing is, I really think with the huge success of Agile, people start thinking about these things in a different way. So what I see in companies happening are most often two things. Well, it's an either or. The one thing is teams are using Agile and that, of course, they can also be not successful, but let's say they are successful. That's what I'm seeing. And then other areas in the company are looking at that team or those teams and saying, oh, what are they actually doing? Can we learn from them? Can we also use stuff like that? And then you see things happening like, I don't know, the marketing team thinks about using Scrum or something like that, right? Just because they want to copy that to their area. The other thing that I'm seeing is that those teams are quite successful, but then they get frustrated because they cannot really benefit from Agile in the way they could because the company isn't
the same way,
Agile enough. And this then creates another pressure to spread it out. And therefore, people are more thinking right now, what can we do for looking at a company holistically and making it Agile. And then maybe another driver, why are we talking about this right now, is digitalization, which in my opinion just means most of the companies are now software companies, no matter what their core product is. So the key differentiator between one product and the other is actually software. And then software is nowadays most often implemented using Agile. And then again, you have that spreading over the company. And then maybe the third thing is like VUCA that we see all over the place, right? That we cannot plan in the way anymore as we could a few years ago, and we have to adapt all the time.
So our discovery actually of your book that happened a couple of weeks ago, and right before that, we were exactly pondering on this question. Like, we've been in Agile for like 10, 15 years, but some of these concepts like beyond budgeting and open spaces came to our prominence maybe a few months ago or something, and we've been like diving it. Then your book just read them together because we were already pondering about this concept. And the question that Enrique posed, then in your book now you also say is the change of generations change the way we think and behave at the workforce, and it's more like traditional hierarchy and versus networked way of thinking and working. Is it maybe that also the answer why these ideas are finally finding some fertile ground to nourish, because like the millennial generation is coming more deeper into the workforce?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this is happening as well. Also now with the pandemic, I guess the push will be even bigger now, because people have seen there are different ways of working, and maybe this is what I like more, and being more self-responsible for how I work, where I work, when I work. And all of that together is really asking companies to be more agile also towards their work stuff. And agile, the way I use it most often, is really more how you explained it at the beginning, Rolf, when you were saying like, well, what's required is companies being responsive, flexible, adaptive, nimble, all of that, right? So not so much agile in any specific methods or frameworks thinking here. Yeah, and I really think we will see more and more that for companies, it will be really tough if they are not agile to find and keep talent.
Yeah.
Like the thing that I'm curious about is like sometimes we go to a company and we try to help them do agile things, right? And we have all this pushback from developers. So I wonder, like, do you have that experience that you actually go to a company and you tell the CEO, yeah, you should go beyond budget, you should stop doing this thing that you're doing? Like, do they just listen to you and they say, oh yeah, sounds like a good idea? Or do you get like tremendous pushback like we get from developers to even doing some basic things, at least we consider basic?
So what I've learned over all those years is that it's almost impossible to introduce a change just by saying, see the bright future in front of you, this is where we should go. So the kind of thing that actually often is talked about, you need the great vision and then everyone is following you. Yeah. I don't see that this is really creating that traction. The thing that creates the traction is being aware of and feeling the pain you are in right now. And if you really realize what's the pain and then creating ideas how to overcome that, this is the main driver for any kind of change to happen. So back to that concrete question, it's very, very difficult to just say, well, look, there's this cool thing beyond budgeting that would really make it all super easy for you. Well, not so much. This actually creates more fear than anything else. But then understanding with fixing the budgets, what are the constraints you are in and where you are losing money because you fixed all the money in the different buckets before, and you cannot really react flexibly on a change in market, for example. And then also ensuring kind of everyone understands that very often companies throw out really money, especially towards the end of the fiscal year, just because in various buckets there is still money left. And of course, also people like me are benefiting from that. I really have to admit that, right? Then, because then they're asking, oh, maybe we look for Jutta and spend some money on training or consulting or whatever. And well, I'm happy about that, but maybe that's not the best use, right? Yeah. So, and this, ensuring people are aware of the problems they are having and ensure that they feel the pain. This is, I think, the only way how you can get get any kind of change happening.
Yeah, because I think the part that I struggled with, like I had this conversation also with a friend, and he is talking about his company that he works for, and like the CEOs and people that are there, they got there doing all these things like quarterly planning, making sure the budget is fixed, and they control the budget, and they are in a pain point right now, and it still does not make this idea goes away, right? Like they are not open at all because like, wow, that's what brought me here. And I found that part, like, I definitely agree when you say that the pain point is definitely a huge trigger, but somehow it's still missing some other ingredient for they to really like open up to new ways that I believe is also better, because I think it's somehow sounds like they're like lying to themselves, right? As well at the same time. And I think they know it.
What do you feel like they think is their solution then? Like, you know, the planning is the problem, it's the pain,
yes,
you know, and then the suggestion
better.
is exactly. So they say like, oh, we just need to plan better and spend more time planning. That's their solution?
Mostly, yeah. Or put more people to the job.
Or estimate better.
Or estimate better. Do your predictions better.
And Jutta, do you have like the same comebacks from your clients as well?
Yeah, that happens too. And I think one problem is there often that we, in quotes, so kind of change agents, put it like in a general word here term, we often also think too big. So it's not about going to a company and say, okay, now you feel the pain, so let's go for beyond budgeting. Yeah. So what's coming in now is more, which is also which is a big part of the BOSSA Nova book, is the probing aspect. So you think about what is the situation you're in, what's your hypothesis would happen if there is like kind of a small change, and then you run an experiment, measure it, and then you see if this helps you to get out of your situation and improve it. So basically it's also basic agile stuff, doing like one step at a time, make the step as small as possible, and then also inspect the result of it, and not only just going into actions, which just creates too much fear, and it's understandable. So it's not that on us, I think, to say, well, they're stupid, they don't get it. That's not true. The fear is real and for a reason, and they have seen stuff before that didn't work. And therefore, with the probing, it is a way of, overcoming the fear and still making progress.
So I think you're going into a really interesting direction for me, like some of the questions that concern me a bit. So if we look at beyond budgeting, it has its own principles. Open Spaces has its own principles. Sociocracy, obviously. Agile, obviously. And there are different approaches and different thinkers about it. So people would say, "Oh, you're not agile. To be agile, you have to like tick all the boxes, or to be open space organization, you really have to do it, follow all the principles." Well, I also recall some talks from Bjarte on beyond budgeting, like how they introduced it there, and in his experience, only now they're trying to introduce different way of measuring performance. So the introduction was really gradual and step by step. So in your experiences, how would you go about a company that's, let's say, completely command and control at this point and like working with fixed budgets? Do you try to implement small steps, or do you go like a really like sort of big bang? Okay, this is what we're gonna turn around.
So actually, the thing that helped me most in my career was always starting with a reflection, and from an agile perspective, I would even say starting with a retrospective on whatever thing we are looking at. So a retrospective for me is not only for a team doing Scrum or XP or whatever and looking back at the last 2 weeks or something. Mm-hmm. A retrospective is, well, you could also say it's just a reflection workshop or so, where you look at the problem that you are facing, considering what around that problem is at the moment serving you actually well, and therefore you really want to keep that? What is missing, and therefore you think there should be something added? What's maybe too much and you want to delete it, and what seems to be really kind of difficult, and you have to find out what we need to change, and then based on that develop like one step after the other, which means, and I think that's the maybe the most important thing, which means that as a change agent, you are not going there and saying, well, I have the answer, just let's do this, right? But it's more about empathizing with the problem they are facing, and also empathizing with the success they had so far, and not saying, well, whatever you did so far is wrong and I know it better, which is also not true, because they're there for a reason, and they're at a stage in their company's career for a reason.
So when you start with these kinds of retros, one of the things that is important, of course, is that people are open and honest, and you kind of need like trust, right? Like people to be able to trust you, but also trust each other to be able to speak what they think is wrong or what could be better. So have you ever faced situations where the atmosphere was so ruined that that they just could not, that they did not have trust in each other and they could not be honest during these kinds of retros?
So most often, well, sometimes I can sense it, but sometimes, and that was the most often part, I hear it already from the client. So the people who are hiring me, that they kind of say, well, not sure if this will work out, and because, and so on. And then I find it much easier to start with one-on-ones. And very often, I'm not sure if I ever really experienced that, and maybe I don't know, I didn't realize it, but I believe I have never experienced that people were not open in a one-on-one with somebody who comes from the outside. You know, I don't have any like interest in making a career in this company or anything like that. I just want to understand. And this helps already.
So I totally agree the part on the, like you go to a company, right? You're going to try to help and you empathize with them. But let's say now there's this CEO who wants to change. He feels the pain and he say like, hey, I want an advice here. Should I start with B or should I start with A from the BOSSA Nova? Like, what is the starting point for me and my team to basically trying to implement this more like a, agile way of working? Would you actually call it agile, even if it's for the whole company? And beyond budget and everything? Or would you actually call BOSSA Nova?
I don't know. I'm flexible here.
And do you already have a BOSSA Nova master or not yet?
No. Oh, that's a complete different topic. I think we have to meet about that at another point in time. I can go on and on about certification. So just to make it short, I'm not at all in favor of certifications.
Oh, good.
Except for I'm a scuba dive master, and I think this certification is really serving me well, and it's also
I think came across information that you're also a climber, right?
I used to. I really was climbing a lot, but well, I moved to northern Germany, and there isn't so much climbing. Well, of course, people who grew up here, they say, well, there are great places, but I kind of lived too long close to the Alps, and so that just doesn't count. However, if I now would go to the Alps, I probably would right away fall down or whatever, be paralyzed in fear or something. I don't know. So I'm more into hiking because that's easy to do here, and also going every once in a while in the Alps because it doesn't need so much preparation.
I had
I need my answer. So should the CEO start on the B or on the A?
Okay, so the answer is actually easy, which is where's the biggest pain? And whatever that is. And very often, actually, companies have, when they call me in or find me for whatever reason, they have already started somewhere. And classically, it is because I'm known as being an Agile something. Most often they have started with Agile and are now ready to kind of explore something else. Most often it's more like, I would say, a kind of a sequence that I'm seeing is Agile, open space, and then there are kind of parallel trails into BM budgeting and sociocracy. They can go really good hand in hand. And now, having said that, John obviously sees it in a different order, because for him, the clients there have already tried sociocracy, and then they are discovering most often Agile as the next thing.
Okay.
All right. And yeah, so during the introduction, I mentioned that companies need to be, resilient to change and become agile. But another thing that is really popular nowadays, or really needed as well, I think, is, companies to become more sustainable, environmental. And I also saw in your Twitter feed that you did a workshop about the impact of the Agile Manifesto on the carbon footprint. It's maybe a jump from topic to topic, but I do find that it's important and a good subject to talk about. So I don't know, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how the Agile Manifesto is related to carbon footprints of companies.
So thanks a lot for bringing this up. And I think it sounds like a jump, but I think it's not actually, because, and referring back to the book, actually, that's our part 4, which is the last part of the book, where basically it's kind of the sound of, well, now that you're a BOSSA Nova company or having implemented company-wide agility, are you done? Oh, maybe not so much, because if you claim you are an Agile organization, people have an expectation. Yeah. So the expectation is, for example, just looking at one part of sustainability, that you will pay your people fair, that you have a kind of an ethics code here, that you will not live for benefit and profit on the cost of the community you are in, and all of that. So if you are not sustainable or taking sustainability seriously, I would say you cannot claim to be Agile. So for me, this really comes together. It is saying you're Agile comes with a reputation that you can easily lose also with that. Yeah. And yeah, so this is that part of the answer. But you also ask about the Agile Manifesto. And
yeah, so like in your Twitter feed, there is a tweet where you said, like, have you ever wondered what's the impact of the Agile Manifesto on our carbon footprint? And then you did a workshop with Claudia Melo about this. So yeah, I was just wondering, like, how do you correlate those? Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So first of all, so we did together a workshop, and we will do another one on Tuesday, upcoming Tuesday. Well, probably, I'm not sure who is hearing this exactly. when, so it might be past Tuesday. Yeah. But also in fall this year, 2021. Okay. So there are also some workshops coming up. So that's maybe the good thing. So yeah, the one key point is that very often, it seems to me, we in software IT think we have the answer to, like, the carbon footprint, and just thinking of, well, we are recording this now remotely and nobody needed to travel like anywhere, and so software made this happen. And which is true in various ways. Also, you could think of, well, an ebook doesn't kill all these trees compared to a physical book, right? Stuff like that. However, actually, if you really look at stuff, so there's a lot of research out there, and there are different forecasts. And one of the forecasts says by 2030, which is in 9 years, it might well be true that ICT, information communications technology, the official term here, will use about 21% of the overall energy consumption. So that means we have a positive impact, but we also have a huge negative impact. And so it's about time that we look at this and what can we actually do to, that this is not really happening. And there, well, maybe one thing that I find is really also important is that sustainability is not only looking at like climate change, the carbon footprint and all of that, which is a super important part. That's a one part of three. And this one part, like carbon footprint, protecting the planet, is called the environmental aspect. But then there's also a social aspect, like aiming on ending poverty. Or also, as the third one, is the economic aspect, which is about improving the lives and prospects of everyone everywhere, which kind of means, well, we cannot make profit at the cost of others, no matter where they are sitting. So there are all these threes coming together. Now, just maybe looking at, which is perhaps even a combination of the economic part and the environmental part, which is looking at all the e-waste that's created. And if you just consider how often you might buy a new phone just because the apps are not running in a good way anymore and it's too slow and whatever, this means software is most often the reason for all the e-waste that's created. And not only the software that's running on our nice phones, that's also true for software running on any kind of, well, servers, laptops, desktops, wherever. And so if we think about the software that we are creating, then we should also think about, well, does this require people to upgrade their hardware? Or what's the utilization of the CPU just because we are adding these features, and maybe we can do this in a different way. And then also in other ways, and we can look at, I don't know, maybe one of the principles, let's say business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Then you can also ask yourself, from the social perspective, are we maybe missing a perspective that provides some more important information and input for the product? And well, this is actually a super important point, because what we see also very often, that the products that we are creating, they are showing some bias.
So this is about inclusivity. You mean certain
exactly
groups? Okay,
exactly. And most often, well, I would say all the time, the products are not showing the bias because somebody thought, well, this is what we want the product to do.
Yeah.
I just can't believe that this is happening. However, what's happening is that we as software teams often maybe have our bias, or are just maybe too homogeneous and not diverse enough, so that the product we are creating just by accident has that bias.
I was thinking about the part of, because I'm still on the sustainability part of, let's say, on the company side. And I definitely heard so many times, more often than not, like people saying, wow, I'm going to go freelancing, I'm going to do my own company because I'm tired of making money for somebody else. And like recently there is a lot of this guy, forgot his name, the guy from Virgin who went to space, right? And then it's like, I saw this, and then somebody commented something like, oh yes, of course, a multi-billion-dollar guy, is going to space because he wants to save humanity, but here on Earth, they don't really care. And then I found this a bit, in a way, like true, right? Like he could probably do more, but of course his company does a lot. But then how do you also, is it possible to actually drive such innovations and still be super sustainable when you are not the multi-billion-dollar? Probably yes, but I think it's, I can definitely relate to what you're saying about being sustainable company to your people as well. And I think, right now it's very hard to see that.
But it's a challenge because in the same time you need to keep track of endless parameters that you have in your
Yes. The
work
complex
environment.
is more, yeah.
And it's just like the cognitive load of that is just tremendous. So I think moving forward probably we'll be coming with some models and mechanisms to perhaps simplify some of this.
Well, there are several things to it. The one thing is, just because the quest is complex doesn't mean we shouldn't start doing anything. It's actually the same thing that, well, Agile is actually good at, because of this incremental approach and doing like one step at a time. And so for me, it's really more starting to ask deeper questions about how we are creating a product and what kind of product we are creating. And just getting started with this, maybe every iteration, just one question, that would be a start. And maybe it is longer than an iteration that we consider one of these things. That's also fine. So that's one of the answers. The other answer, which I find maybe even harder. So I have been also wondering with now, well, the race to the moon or Mars or wherever, to the space in general. And we have all those problems on Earth, right? And all the money goes there and whatever. However, if I look at myself, I know compared to a lot of people, well, some people would say, well, the way you are living is really super sustainable. But, you know, I also have my areas where I'm not willing to give up or what is just still super important to me. And who is out there who will judge, well, what you're doing, this is really not right. And look at that. So I think that's the wrong approach. And it should be, I don't know, probably more the thing. We have to remind ourselves that this is a super important topic. Well, and the planet reminds ourselves on that as well. And therefore, just get going and do one step at a time. And it will not be perfect, not on the individual base and not on a team base and not on a company base, but aiming for really making a difference. I think that's just the important step here.
And I wanted to kind of circle back to a previous topic that we discussed, something about trust in organizations. You mentioned that you would, if you feel that there is lack of trust, you would approach one-on-one, and then the conversation is generally very open. And that is also our experience. And this is generally the way maybe we approach work at clients, where we don't really know the terrain. But that, because that's how we do it. And then we came across open spaces agility, open spaces, the beta codex. I was like, okay, but this is a bit counterintuitive to what we're doing. And so the question was always bubbling. Doing an open spaces, does that in an organization there is some corrupted trust, let's say, does that give enough room? Does that create the atmosphere for actually the people to speak up?
Well, the problem maybe with all of those 4 streams beyond budgeting, open space, sociocracy, and Agile is that they all will deliver better if there is trust. And the good thing about all of those four streams is that they really also help to that trust is created. So it is really on both sides. Now, what I once learned from Tom DeMarco, well, and it's probably an idiom or something, is that trust always goes ahead. So there are, of course, also other sayings like control is better than trust or something like that, right? But if you are not showing you are having trust in someone, some group, whatever, then these people cannot really show that they are trustworthy. It always goes this way, that somebody first has to trust them. And maybe one example that I've experienced now several times, which is on the open space part. And actually, the open space part is maybe the most difficult part in the BOSSA Nova section, because so many people understand open space and have seen it as a facilitation technique. However, we don't mean open space as a facilitation technique. So that's fine if you use that. That's super helpful. But what we mean is using the open space principles as a strategy in your company, or maybe you could even say, like, this is the core culture of it, or even the DNA of the company, meaning always having this invitation out there that people can follow their passion with responsibility. And now back to like one very concrete example, which is self-selecting teams. So which is an open space thing, really. But if you say, well, the way we put our people into teams is actually not on us from whatever manager perspective. It is people choose what product they want to work on and with whom. And I have done that, I believe, the first time, I think it's like 15 years ago. And at that time, when we said, well, let's try that, let's do that, we were all, including myself, a bit nervous about that. So, for example, will there be any topics nobody wants to work on because it's the boring topic? Will there be teams who are absolutely only seniors, experts, something, and then other teams who are the, sorry to say that, the laggers or so? And it never happened. It never happened. And we had so many discussions beforehand. What would we do if this happens, right? And because we feared. But first we showed trust. We said, well, you solved that. We had it open at that time. It was really on site. We had it in auditorium. People could sign up on flip charts and then cross their names out and go somewhere else. And actually, surprisingly, they figured this themselves. So they figured that, well, there's a team who has really too much expertise there where that one hasn't. And so they talked to each other and said, like, what about if I move over there or you move over there and help there and so on. And that just happened.
It's interesting that you that you mentioned that, because at a client I experienced a roughly similar way where the engineers could select a team, like they could vote on a team that they would prefer to be working in. But then the key difference there is that the development manager in the end said, like, okay, I now know all the preferences of the people, and then I will make the final spread of the people. So, I think it's really nice that you give an example where the team themselves say, like, okay, this team seems to be a bit lacking in headcount or in expertise, let me move over there, which seems to be, a lot more gratifying for the teams as well. Because I mean, if the development manager makes the final selection and you get like your least favorite pick, then you're going to have unhappy people. Whereas you feel, that people can make their own decisions, or like democratically, I think the acceptance will be a lot higher.
This is really a super example for a democratic decision in that way, that you ask everyone's voice, but you're not listening to it.
Well, partly, right? Some people were lucky and some people were unlucky.
Yeah, and this is an easy way to lose all the trust. If you first say, well, let's do it though next time, what would I do as a developer? I would say, well, it doesn't really matter anyway, so they will decide. So why losing that time? But we found it important all the time when we did this. So in other cases, we used, for example, Confluence or any kind of wiki where people then sorted it out. And so if it was more a remote setting, that you are not pushing that this will be solved in an hour or two or even in half a day. So most often we used about 2 weeks for having that settled because things are coming up. And then, of course, what's also helpful is saying maybe 3 months later we will revisit. And the V is, again, the people finding, well, does it work, or do we need to have any other shifts here or so?
So I do have, because also in the book, you mentioned something, and we see this all the time now, right? Like in the past, the companies organized themselves, like you had the marketing department, sales department, development department, and now there is this trend to say, like, well, it should be a cross-functional team. And what I'm, let's say, failing to understand is, okay, we do an open space, we're going to figure out teams, but then let's assume, and maybe they never happened, right? But let's say you as a company, you know, and you have, let's say, consultants there trying to say, hey, we should have a cross-functional team. And these teams, they just get a bunch of back-end developers, like no sales, no marketing, no anything. Would this then be a case for intervention? And like, okay, guys, this team cannot exist because you are not cross-functional? Or do you also expect the cross-functionality to naturally come in an open space?
Yeah, so interesting. So first of all, it's a minor correction. So we are not running this as an open space event, right? It's more following the open space principles here, right? It's not an event. Well, and of course you could also do that, but and for the way we always did that was in advance looking at what's needed. And we also did this together with the people, with various people, or sometimes with representatives from various areas. And so we, in the same way as we said, well, there's a team, and because we will run in using Scrum, then somebody needs to be the PO and somebody needs to be the Scrum Master. And so we also, for that, had people to sign up for it, you know. They said, right, somebody said, well, I'm interested to be the PO here. And that's what happened in the same way also in terms of like front end, back end, whatever, marketing and so on. We said like, okay, this is the product, and probably we need people who know about this and that, or what we also always said is are interested to gain expertise in this and that, because we also wanted to have it open that somebody, let's use your example, who isn't back-end developer, maybe actually wants to become a front-end developer or something completely different. I don't know, right? But also saying, well, there's also a path open here.
Yeah, I guess that's clear. So I think the main question goes more to, I guess, the managers or the directors who are organizing those teams, like, why is it so hard to let this go, right? Like, because I can imagine for them, it's just they are also trying their best, and like they think that's the best combination. And yeah, I actually wonder now, like, why is it so hard to just let people do that?
Well, because of fear. You fear things are getting out of control. It's letting go, which is often not easy.
We're slowly coming to, I guess, the time limits. I have one question before, at least from my side, maybe the last one. I have so many, but I thought, okay, maybe this one I want to tackle. So, as part of sociocracy, it drives on making decisions by consent. One thing that really struck with me from the book was to decide on something when no one has a paramount objection to the proposed decision. So, and I found that really, and it says that like the process then does not require trust from people, but it sort of creates an environment structure where trust can build over time. So,
right.
What for me was really interesting is that it requires people to not agree with a decision, but to object with a decision, to not accept the decision. And I think, is that maybe the key turning point, because then people still have the sense of control. They're not urged to agree, but they have actually the freedom to disagree.
Yeah, like a veto or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the power to say no, to say.
Yes. Yes, right. And for me, there are several things that come along with being successful in making consent decisions. So the first thing is exactly the thing that you're saying. It is about acceptance and not about agreement. So I might favor something else than what's here on the desk, but can I live with that? Yeah, very much so. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, if I cannot live with this, if it's out of my range of tolerance, then the paramount objection is always around, why do I think if we decide this way, we might not be able to reach our joint goal? So that the decision puts the joint goal at risk. So again, it's not me liking something or favoring something or whatever. It's really still thinking, well, we want to do this thing together. Can we still do that? Or will this now not be possible because? And this changes for me a lot of stuff, because now it means it's different than for consensus. If I come up with an objection in consensus, what I often see happening there is that then everyone starts convincing me that I'm wrong with my objection, right? Versus in consent, the objection is super welcomed, it's embraced, because probably we have overlooked something which really would get us into trouble. Because we all want to reach that joint goal. So if somebody has figured, well, maybe we cannot reach that goal now anymore, well, we better know about this, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So would this be similar to that Jeff Bezos, like, how to say, disagree and commit? Would be comparable to that? Or did I misunderstand?
I'm not sure. Can you try to ask in a different way?
Like, because I think there is just Jeff Bezos' famous principle, whatever. Like, you go to a meeting and then you always say, like, yeah, I disagree, but I commit to it, right? And I wonder if this is kind of the same philosophy on behind.
Yeah.
That you don't per se have to.
Yeah, it is similar. Yeah. I would say if I say I disagree, that's pretty harsh already.
Okay.
So it would be more that I think for me, the wording should be different. So I would say, well, I can live with this. I can tolerate it. So I would say, or I say, I don't have a permanent objection. So I would think the wording needs to be less than that. But I think the overall, trend is the same.
And, my last question to you is related to, I think I remember this discussion with, don't remember now who, but somebody said, like, if you don't implement Agile, right, or you don't bring Agile to the company or not Scrum, every team, if they just probe themselves, eventually they're going to reach a framework like Scrum. At least that was somebody said. And I found that an interesting observation that might be true. Do you also think if every organization is just probing themselves and experimenting things, eventually they would also get to beyond budgeting and all these concepts that the BOSSA Nova puts together? Or do you think, like, no, maybe there will come something totally?
Well, I think it is what kind of environment you are providing. Is it possible or not? The same thing is true with, like, any kind of team would figure out something like Scrum. I kind of agree, because this is also the way I try to help teams, again, starting with a retrospective, and they figure out what they need to do. And it's always a very agile process they come up with. However, if the environment is not there, that somebody is actually listening, then it's more that, well, especially the bigger the company is getting, the more rules and regulations you have in place. And because people feel, well, I don't know all those thousands of people, and therefore I need to have something in place that controls them. And so I don't think in this setting it comes natural. It is a kind of a natural thing for a startup.
Yes.
So size makes a difference.
Startups are, anyway, the most agile organizations we know.
until they grow. But that's the thing. But then they
Yeah.
grow and they become again the same command and control thing that we know of. So basically, then if I hear you and if you have a command and control environment, then probably this is never going to emerge.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. I mean, we have a few more minutes, but I guess it might be good to wrap it up. I don't know, Jutta, do you have any questions for us, maybe?
I'm just impressed how fast you got into this topic. And I know you brought a lot of stuff with you already. It wasn't like you are newbies, of course, but still, I know the Bossa Nova stuff it's not easy. It is just too much, and it's very complex stuff. And I admire how fast you got really diving deep into that. So thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah, it's helped us also a lot to organize our thoughts around the topic. So no, thank you for actually doing it for us.
Yeah, for writing it and organizing all the ideas. So now we just consume it. It's much simpler.
Yeah.
That's really amazing.
All right. Well, I would like to thank Jutta very much for being a guest here. And of course, also thanks to Panche and Aniek for changing up the schedules to make this happen. You can follow Jutta on Twitter if you would like to. It's at Jutta Eckstein, and we will provide you with some links in the description below. She's on LinkedIn as well. You can follow her there. And she's written a whole bunch of books, including the one that we just talked a lot about, Company-Wide Agility with Beyond Budgeting, Open Space, and Sociocracy. You can check out more of her books on jeckstein.com. Again, we will give you the link. And if you have any suggestions, you can also reach us on Twitter, 4Scouts, and podcast at 4scouts.nl is also the address for any other suggestions you might have for us. All right, Jutta, thanks again very much for being here, and see you guys later.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Scoutcast, Roasting Marshmallows, with your host, Rolf Surd. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit 4scouts.nl and on Twitter at 4Scouts. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time on Scoutcast, Roasting Marshmallows.